Hi and welcome to my Random Ruminations. Someone's standing right outside my window. Very irritating. Anyway, my apologies for missing Thursday. Was it Thursday? No, Friday, yesterday's video blog because, well, my body decided to turn itself inside out on Thursday night. We'll ignore that. But it wasn't wasted time because while that happened, I was reading up about the actual history of marriage. I mean, I'm a history buff anyway. I do prefer ancient history. I mean, I've read multiple books on Byzantium and the emperors of the Eastern Roman Empire, and I have a huge fascination for Greek history and Carthaginian as well. Really interesting nation. But for once I decided to go a little bit more up to date, and I started reading about marriage and the way it's changed over time. And here's the thing, I don't think marriage equality opponents actually know what traditional marriage is. Okay, we're going to ignore the whole, if we're going to use the Bible as the template for why two people shouldn't be allowed to get married, well, we're going to have to ignore that there are instances of fathers marrying daughters. There are instances of men marrying hundreds of women. Not even talking about concubines. There are instances of forced marriage after rape. You know, I'm sorry. The Bible's definition of marriage is not only incredibly manipulative and incredibly inconsistent, but it's also pretty inhumane in a lot of places. And this is what Christians and in my country, Catholics especially, are using to say gay people shouldn't be allowed to get married. And you could bring, you know, I'm sorry, but if God hates gays so much, why doesn't he mention it in the Ten Commandments? I'm sorry, your God is more pissed off that you're envious of my tits than he is pissed off that I'm gay. It's that simple. Your own book says it. But this is the book that's being used as a cudgel to beat LGBT people over the head with, you cannot marry. Well, I'm sorry, but I wouldn't be surprised if the vast majority of LGBT couples, by any traditional European definition of marriage, are actually married. No, seriously, I'm not joking. Okay, here's the thing to remember. There's two Europes. Historically, there are two Europes. And I don't mean East and West, and I don't mean countries, because countries didn't really exist, and nationalities didn't really exist, and the difference between East and West, it doesn't come into this. The two Europes are the nobility on one hand, and the peasantry on the other. Now, the nobility had what we would, to some degree at least, recognize as weddings and marriages. Their weddings were often officiated by priests, by bishops, by whoever within the clergy, and they were usually registered with the church, and they would have been either state sanctioned or sanctioned by their particular throne or empire or whatever. So there was a governmental involvement in it. But the reason for that was simple. The nobility didn't want bastards inheriting. Historically, one of the things that has screwed Ireland over massively has been our tradition of splitting property between children. The end result was that farms became smaller and smaller and smaller, land holdings became smaller and smaller and smaller, family fortunes became smaller and smaller and smaller. The end result being that Irish people could go from being relatively wealthy to not having a pot to piss in within a few generations. Well, the nobility didn't want that to happen. And here I'm speaking about English, French, Spanish, German. The Habsburgs were freaking great at this. Let's keep the money in the family. One way of doing this historically for nobility has been intermarrying with distant family, cousins typically. But the main way of doing it was to make sure you didn't have any bastards, and to declare a single heir. The only way you could do that, well, it wasn't the only way, but the main way to do that was to make sure that your marriage was taken in the sight of God. In other words, in a church with clergy. And by doing so, you have a situation where you get married with an oath. And you're talking about early Christian Europe. Oaths are kind of a big thing. Now, on the other side of the divide, you have the peasantry. And for most peasantry, the idea of a wedding or marriage basically amounted to, I'm making a commitment to you. The other person going, I'm making a commitment to you. And that was it. Sometimes they would actually register that it had happened with the Christian church. At the time it wasn't even Catholic church, it would have been Christian. But there was almost no church involvement in peasant marriage. There was basically no state involvement. You could end up in a situation where if you lived on a particular noble's land, they would have authority you would be expected to go to them to get permission to marry, but it was also expected of the noble to give permission for you to marry. There was this almost unspoken rule between the two groups that, you ask and we'll say yes. If you don't ask, well, we're probably not going to interfere anyway. But, so yeah, that's traditional marriage, actually traditional marriage. The traditional going to a church or wherever with the big dress that makes you look like a meringue and the witnesses and the whole lot, that only came about because the peasantry, and I'm still going to use the peasantry for this rather than saying middle and lower classes, decided to start aping their social superiors. In other words, if we look like them, we may be accepted more by them. Which, to a degree, actually makes sense. But most Christians, the Christians that bang gay people over the head with the Bible while telling them, no, you can't, they're talking about the whole 2,000 years of Christianity's history. Their attitude is that there has always been one man, one woman, and it's there in the Bible, and it's not. I can't find it in the Bible. I've looked. There are instances of the Bible of one man marrying one woman, but they're outnumbered largely by one man and many women. So yeah. So here's the thing. I said a few moments ago that most of the gay people I know are married. And they are. By any actual European traditional definition of marriage that it has a historical basis, they are. I am. And my partner is. We have made a commitment to each other that whether times get hard or times are easy, we are staying together. We have two very, very furry children, essentially, and our dogs. Two creatures that rely on us utterly for everything. By taking a commitment to ourselves and to these two life forms that rely on us, we are essentially in a marriage. To my mind, that's what we are. Many of my friends are, to my mind, married. My little sister, the kitten, and her partner, who, to inflate his ego, we will call the doctor, are, to my mind, married. They've made a commitment to each other. They've made sacrifices for one another and for each other's happiness. That to me is historically the traditional definition of a marriage. I should point out that the kitten shortly will be Dr. Kitten, which I think is like the best Bond villain name ever. Seriously, think about it. Dr. Kitten, and she has these cats that have poison on their claws as assassins, and they're controlled by microchips, and patent pending. This is copyrighted. Yeah. So that's what occurred to me when I was doing all this reading up over the last couple of days, well, yesterday primarily and a little bit earlier in the week, that I don't think marriage equality opponents actually know what they're opposing. I don't think they actually know what they're fighting for. Because, as I said, and in conclusion, traditionally, the state and the church have basically no influence on the marriage of non-nobles. So that's it. Anyway, talk to you again soon, and have fun. Bye.